If you happen to be in Los Angeles, you should definitely do 3 things. Visit the Hollywood Hills, have a bite of the local street food, and board USS Iowa, one of the fastest, most heavily armed, and iconic battleships of the World War II era.
She and her 3 sister ships were to show the Axis countries, Germany and Japan, who was in charge at sea. But what traits could help Iowa achieve that?
The first and most important thing was her 9 406mm guns. The whole ship was constructed as a platform for them. Firing a salvo of shells right into a target over the horizon required a crew of almost 100 men per turret. A warning alarm sounded before each shot. Then the crew stood still for a couple of seconds, and a shockwave shook this gigantic ship. Iowa's next important characteristic was speed. This was facilitated by a powerful main propulsion plant and an unusual hull design.
What a sight! This absolute giant with a displacement of more than 50,000 tons is traveling faster than, for example, one of the most expensive and largest yachts in the world to date, a Zong. It's as if Iowa's entire design screams, "I'm not a battleship, I'm a giant racing boat."
Now add to these advantages an automatic fire control system, a prototype of a future computer. This highly precise computing machine allowed her to land salvos so accurately that her enemies would have no chance. However, by the time the first Iowa entered service, there were 2 classes of Axis battleships clinging to the title of biggest, baddest monster of the 7 seas. The first such class included battleship Tirpitz, the pride of the German Kriegsmarine.
Tirpitz is a serious piece of machinery. The strength of her armor and 8 380mm main caliber guns speaks for itself. Her sister ship, Bismarck, sank British cruiser Hood in a matter of minutes. Tirpitz kept the whole Allied fleet in the North Atlantic on their toes, just by being stationed in the Norwegian fjords. How would Iowa be able to stand up to such an opponent?
In a one-on-one battle, the German battleship would certainly try to get as close to the U.S. ship as possible to maximize her chances of landing a hit. But Iowa, whose accuracy and range could far surpass those of Tirpitz, could maneuver at high speed and maintain the necessary distance to fire, while leaving the German ship little chance. It would be destroyed and left to burn. By the way, the threat of Tirpitz sailing into the Atlantic was the reason why the U.S. initially deployed Iowa to the East Coast. Adolf Hitler didn't want to sacrifice his last operational capital ship, so didn't allow her to leave the Norwegian fjords. By early 1944, Iowa had transferred to the Pacific, where the giant Yamato class was reigning supreme. The newest battleship of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Yamato, was the biggest ship of this type in the world. Once again, the biggest battleship in the world. Yamato would be a formidable opponent, but that doesn't mean the outcome of the battle would be a foregone conclusion. The difference in speed, as well as Iowa's excellent radars, allowing her to fire accurately at long ranges in any weather conditions, balanced the chances for Iowa and Yamato in a duel. One accurate salvo could have determined the winner in this fight, because while 460mm is truly impressive, 406 is also an awful lot.
It's probably becoming clear why the naval commanders of both fleets kept their steel giants away from each other. To rely on such a lucky chance as a successful salvo was too big of a gamble, and indeed, an unaffordable luxury. Especially since by the end of World War II, the center stage at sea was taken by aircraft and the aircraft carriers that delivered them to battle. In fact, it was aviation that destroyed Tirpitz at her Norwegian berthing and Yamato during her last voyage to Okinawa.
That's true, but the Iowa-class battleships also found their place in the new reality, and that place was escorting aircraft carriers. This battleship was cherished for her speed, as it enabled her to follow the air group without slowing it down. And, of course, she was valued for her AA firepower. There was also a diplomatic mission in the history of this battleship. Iowa transported none other than U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt to North Africa, from where he headed for the Tehran conference in which Churchill and Stalin took part.
This was the journey on which the legendary American president spent 2 weeks in a steel cabin with a special companion called Vicky. That story almost coincides with the beginning of Iowa's service. One day, the battleship's first commander picked up and brought a small dog to the ship. His wife couldn't stand dogs at home. And yes, 1 week in November and another week in December 1943, Vicky brightened the journey of the 32nd U.S. president with his presence.
Iowa headed out on different missions during her service, and when the battleship returned home for the last time victoriously, she passed symbolically under the Golden Gate Bridge. The ship was put into reserve, but she later returned to active duty and served during the Korean War. It was after that war, in 1958, that the ship was again given a chance to rest and placed in the fleet's reserve for what was supposed to be the last time.
It seemed to be a Hollywood-style happy ending for an unforgettable blockbuster, but fate had a different idea. There was a sequel awaiting this behemoth, one with both new journeys and serious new challenges.
25 years later, in the spring of 1984, after a major modernization, Iowa was recommissioned into the U.S. Navy. At that time, the Cold War had escalated, with the USSR and U.S. showing off their military potential to each other. Iowa and her sister ships are a clear demonstration of the indestructibility of the U.S. Navy. These 40-year-old battleships are packed with state-of-the-art equipment and weaponry. For the next 5 years, the battleship took part in various U.S. Navy drills. She sailed above the Arctic Circle, and she visited ports in France, Germany, Denmark, and Norway. During the First Gulf War, Iowa accompanied tanker convoys from Kuwaiti ports into the high seas. And then, tragedy struck.
On April 19, 1989, while drills were in full swing, her second main battery turret was shaken by a massive explosion that killed 47 people. The turret was destroyed as it melted from the inside, and the deadly explosion resulted in the highest number of casualties in the battleship's history.
By that time, the Cold War was on the verge of becoming a thing of the past. The USSR underwent dramatic changes, leading to its sudden collapse. In the early 1990s, the U.S. defense budget was drastically cut, and battleships were pronounced inefficient. Iowa was the first to be decommissioned from the U.S. Navy in October 1990. In 2012, she docked in Los Angeles and was converted into a museum.
Shout out to this episode's sponsor, Cooler Master, your modular creative control center. Grab it and make your workflow fun and easy. Find the code in the video and use it to enter the contest for Cooler Master Master Hub, Cooler Master gear, and exclusive in-game rewards. Want to know more? Check out our article in the link below. Wait, there's even more rewards. Comment on the video with your in-game name, realm, and answer a question about Iowa for a chance to win premium Ship 7 container. And the question is, what year was the USS Iowa commissioned into the United States Navy?